How to design a connector in PractiCAD. The best way to get connectors in PractiCAD is to simply import them from PractiCAM. However, you can design your connections directly within this system. To do that, we're going to go into the library icon on the PractiCAD ribbon. When the library opens up, we're going to maximize it for this tutorial. We're going to come to the left. We're going to go down to where it says Allowances, and we're going to hit the little plus key to open up our allowance types. Then we're going to go to where it says Connector and open it up again, and PractiCAD will list the three types of connectors we have currently: rectangular, round, and oval. To create a new rectangular connection, we're just going to click on rectangular. PractiCAD will show you a list of all of the connections you have currently. It's also going to open up the create a new item on the left hand side in your browser. We're going to click it once. And once we do that, PractiCAD is going to ask us to name a new connector. And for this tutorial, we're just going to name it PCAD Connector and hit Enter. Once we've done that, now all we need to do is go over the different parameters that PractiCAD offers for rectangular connectors. We're going to cover them one at a time. The first choice we have on our list of parameters for rectangular connectors is the choice for gap. The gap parameter also exists in PractiCAM. We're going to put the value 2 here for gap. What that means is that if we were to put two fittings down that both had the PCAD connector as their connections and attach them, that there would be a 2-inch gap between them. So what we're doing here is we're just taking a piece of duct, we're putting the PCAD connector on it, we're going to hit C for continue to put the other connector, and you can see when they're connected, we have a gap of exactly 2 inches or whatever the value is for the property gap. The next two parameters we have are the parameters for connector size and connector grown. Connector size parameter is simply the length of the allowance itself. If we set it to 1 inch, you can actually see in the preview that PractiCAD will add a 1-inch allowance. To demonstrate the allowance, we're currently in the appearance slip and drive. If we were to set the connector size to 2, that would mean that the connector size would be 2 inches. Now the connector size parameter is actually being imported from PractiCAM if you imported it. However, you can design any connector you want here. To demonstrate that, we're going to show you the connector size parameter inside PractiCAM. Over here in PractiCAM, we are looking at a slip and drive connection. And you could see by taking a look at the way this connection is built that the connection is actually 1 inch long. However, you can see here that we also have another parameter called add, and it is set to be a 1/2 inch. The add parameter is actually in PractiCAM the notch back. What that would mean is that if we've got a 1-inch connection and we say to add or notch back the connection by a 1/2 inch, it would mean that we're leaving a 1/2 inch of length of material at the end of the fitting for the connector. Therefore, we would lose a 1/2 inch of material. You could see here by your preview, if we set this to 0 and click on our preview in PractiCAM, that the connection gets longer because now it's a 1-inch connector as it's represented here. However, when we go to add and put a 1/2 inch, PractiCAM will actually notch it into the fitting a 1/2 inch, which means we're going to lose a 1/2 inch of material on each side. For example, with slip and drive, if it's a finished length 5-foot piece of duct or 60 inches, if we lose a 1/2 inch on each side, the finished length for a slip and drive duct off the coil should be 59 inches. The parameter add in PractiCAM is actually the parameter connector grown in PractiCAD. So coming back to PractiCAD, you can see here if we wanted to make a slip and drive, just like we had it in our shop software, we'd make the connector grown a 1/2 inch. Basically, if you take the connector size and you subtract the value of connector grown, whatever that value is the length of material you're going to lose on each end of the fitting. So in this particular case, we have a 1-inch connector. We subtract the 1/2 inch connector grown or notch back, which leaves a 1/2 inch, and that means we lose a 1/2 inch on each side of the fitting. So a 60-inch fitting would now be 59 inches. The connector flange parameter is a parameter that allows us to change the attachment point that a PractiCAD grill or air device will attach to a PractiCAD duct entity. What we're going to do is design a quick connection. We're going to say that the connector size is going to be 2 inches And for appearance, we're going to say that we want it to appear like a flange in connection. Now, if you were to design this type of connection, though on the drawing the appearance would be a flange in, and we're going to cover the appearance section in a second, if you were to attach a PractiCAD grill to this piece of duct, or the face of this duct, the PractiCAD grill's neck would not resize to the inside of this flange. It would actually by default attach it to the outside of this flange. So though you have a flange in appearance, if this duct was 36 by 18, the grill's neck would be 36 by 18. However, in the instances where we would like to be able to design a connector and we would like a grill to snap to the face of the connector but resize to the inside flange dimensions, we can use the parameter connector flange. For example, what we're going to do here is take the connector size and make it 0. And for connector flange, we're going to say 2 inches. Now the appearance looks the same. And one thing you should take note is that the appearance, when it comes to connector flange, does not make a difference. Whether you pick TDC, drive and slip, or any other choice we have. When you say 2-inch connector flange, that means that this connection will be 2 inches on the inside face of the fitting. It will not take up any length of the fitting. However, if we go to snap a grill to the 2-inch connector flange, if the duct was 36 by 18, the grill's neck would now be 32 by 14 because we'd lose 2 inches on each side, so 4 inches. So by changing the way you design this connector and by using the connector flange, if you snap a sidewall grill to one entity that has a connector flange, the neck will resize to the inside. If you snap a grill where the connector flange is 0, the connector size is the same value with the appearance flange in, it's actually going to snap it to the outside. So to demonstrate this, we're going to look at 2 connections. First, we're going to take the PCAD connector and we're going to change connector size to 0 and we're going to say connector flange 2. And then we're going to save it. And then what we're going to do is look at the 1-inch flange connector we have over here on the left. And you can see by rotating this connection, what we've got here is this connector has the same appearance, flange in, and it's got the connector size 1 inch. Now the difference between these 2 connectors, from using connector size with the appearance flange in, or just using the connector flange parameter, is if we go to snap a grill or air device to this fitting, once again, it's going to take the neck, and the neck is going to snap to the outer dimension, which is where my cursor is at this moment. So to demonstrate this, we're going to exit out of my library. What we have on the drawing are 2 pieces of duct. The first piece of duct, if we click on it, you can see that the connector is PCAD connector for the in and the out. That is the connector we designed with the 2-inch connector flange. The second piece of duct on the drawing we're going to click on, you can see this duct was placed with a 1-inch flange in on the connector in and connector out. Now what we're going to do here is we're going to basically grab out of our architectural bin one of our side wall grills. And we go over tutorials on designing side wall grills. And we're going to click on it and we're going to snap first to the 1-inch flange in. Notice when we click on that duct that the connector, the neck attaches perfectly and flush with the connector. And now what we're going to do is change the face by changing our length and width deltas. And what we've got here is a grill neck that is 20 by 18. It has snapped to the duct, but it did snap to the outside of the duct. It met the duct's walls. Now what we're going to do is come over here to where we've got the PCAD connector. We're going to grab the same sidewall grill. We're going to snap, and then we're going to change the length and width parameters. And this has nothing to do with the tutorial on the connector flange. But notice that when we snap to this duct, PractiCAD is not snapping to the outer walls. What it's doing, if we put this in orbit, is it is actually snapping to the inside flange. or the connector flange. Notice here that on the one on the left, if you zoom in, you do have an inside flange appearance. But you can see if you follow this blue line that it's actually attaching the grill to the outer walls of the duct. However, with the connector flange parameter, when you snap a grill, it snaps the neck to the inside of the connector flange parameter. Now this flange, regardless of how large or small you make the value, has no bearing on the length of the fitting. So you can see that this fitting here is 60 inches, the one with the PractiCAD connector on it. The one we did the 1-inch flange in, we made the connector size 1 inch. So we lost an inch on each side of the fitting to create this connector. So all the connector flange parameter really does is it gives us a value to create a lip at which we can snap PractiCAD grills and air devices to. It is a parameter with a very specific purpose. The appearance choice allows us to choose how we would like a specific connection to look or preview in PractiCAD. It actually has no bearing on the contour of the allowance. That means if you were to download a connection from PractiCAD to PractiCam, the appearance you have here will not make a difference to the contour of the allowance itself. However, the appearance does allow us to see or view the connection how we'd like it to view inside PractiCAD. You can see here that we've got the appearance set as slip and drive, but we also have the ability to switch appearance to TDC, drive and slip, flange in and flange out, hammer lock, and slip and slip. The only time the appearance will not actually preview, as you see here, is if in fact you have chosen a value for connector flange. Connector flange, as we covered in earlier tutorials, once you give it a value, PractiCAD basically puts an inside flange so that we can connect something to the inner part of it. However, anytime connector flange is 0, you will always see the appearance that you have listed in this particular option. The compatible parameter allows us to choose what other connectors this particular connector will be compatible with. What we have here is we got a dialog box that is opened up by clicking on it right under the compatible section. And when we do that, you're going to get a list of every other connector that you have inside your software system. Remember, the choices you have will be different than the ones in this tutorial. And we get to choose next to every single connector the choice between yes and no. If we say yes, it means that the PractiCAD connector is compatible with the PractiCAD connector. That means that PractiCAD will be able to attach two pieces of duct with the PractiCAD connector connection, and it will not break duct line integrity. There will be no break in the duct line because it's what we call a compatible or legal connection. Now, PractiCAD gives you the ability to state that a particular connection can be compatible not with just one connection, but with multiple connections. For example, let's say we wanted the PractiCAD connector to be compatible with not just the PractiCAD connector, but also with raw edge. We're going to say that it's compatible with PractiCAD and raw edge. Now, the second you choose choices for yes, you will notice down in the window where it says default, we see a list of those two choices. And what PractiCAD is asking us to do is to select the default connection. And what that means is if we select PractiCAD connector, if we go to put a PractiCAD connector on the drawing and we grab another piece of duct and go to snap to it, that the duct we're holding should automatically adjust its connection to the same or default PractiCAD connector. However, if we decide to make an edit and we change it to another connection that's compatible, PractiCAD will accept it. If you change it to a connection that's not compatible, dependent upon the options you have in PractiCAD, PractiCAD might either break the duct line or change both connections. And we're going to demonstrate that throughout this tutorial. So what we're going to do is say that the PractiCAD connector is compatible with itself and it's compatible with raw edge. We've chosen the PractiCAD connector to be a default with itself, but we do still have the ability to change or edit a connection involving raw edge. And what we're going to do here is press OK. Once we've set the compatible connector here, we can exit out, and now we're going to go into our drawing space. Now what we're going to do is draw a piece of duct on the drawing utilizing our PCAD connector. We're going to come into the fitting box and we're going to set it to be PCAD and PCAD, and we're going to place this on the drawing. Now currently the appearance of the PCAD connector is that of a slip and drive. Now what we're going to do is we're going to come into the fitting bin, we're going to grab a fitting, and you can see here that it's currently slip and drive. To make this even easier to spot, we're going to change the connector in to TDC. And now what we're going to do is bring this duct and attach it to this duct. Now because TDC and the PCAD connector are not compatible, the second these two touch, you can see that PractiCAD automatically adjusts the connector in of this fitting to be a PCAD connector. It doesn't change the connector out, but it does change the connector that's attaching, because that was the default. Now, if we were to switch this connector in to raw edge, you'll notice that PractiCAD does not change the connector, PCAD connector, from this duct. And the reason why is, even though when you zoom in we have two different connectors, we've said that those connectors are compatible. And because of that, we can make an edit. We can even run a duct line check. And when we run the duct line check, you can see that it's only marking the ends of the fitting. There is no break. That is an acceptable connection to PractiCAD because they're compatible. However, what we're going to do now is we're going to click on this duct here, and we're going to change the connector in to TDC. Notice when we do that, PractiCAD automatically changes this connection to TDC, because inside allowances we have TDC compatible with TDC. So the way it works is that we will not allow you to attach incompatible connectors. You can only attach connectors that you have stated will match with one another. And if you choose a variety of connectors, PractiCAD will choose the default connector first, but then allow you to edit to the other connectors you say are compatible. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that the entire mechanism we just showed you will only work in this manner if in your ductwork options you have the Allow Incompatible Connectors option unchecked. And we have separate tutorials on that, but to show you where it is, we're going to go into my library. And under ductwork libraries, you have the option here to allow incompatible connectors junction. This option we recommend to always keep unchecked. When it's unchecked, we're not allowed to have incompatible connectors. So PractiCAD's automatically going to change the connections as you snap duct to duct. And it will only allow you to edit connectors that are compatible. Otherwise, every time you make one connection change, PractiCAD's going to change the connection you're attaching to it to whatever the compatible connector is. The last parameter we have for rectangular connectors currently is the choice for complementary connectors. Now, complementary connectors is a very unique parameter which was designed specifically for connection types like slip and drive and slip. It is not used in connections like TDC, TDF, ductmate, and those where all four sides of the connection are identical. The reason why we're going to use slip and slip in this tutorial is because complementary connections helps us to make sure that when we're attaching fittings in PractiCAD and rotating those fittings, that we can get the specific side of a connection we want in the right place. In other words, we need to decide with a slip and drive connection what side the drive is going on and what side the slip is going on. And there's a couple different philosophies on what is the right way to do this. There are two main philosophies that you get between contractors. One philosophy says that whenever we go to decide what side of a fitting gets the drive will always be on the depth. Another philosophy says whenever we decide what side of a fitting should get the drive is we always put the drive on the short side. Now, complementary connectors are designed to override specific portions of your specification tables, and we will get into this later when we get into the advanced specification section. For those that choose to have the depth of their fitting always carrying the drive, complementary connections can be used to make sure that when you get a slip and drive or drive and slip connection, that the drive side is always on the depth. If your philosophy is that the drive should always be on the short side of a fitting, we need to go into our advanced specifications and create settings there. And there will be separate tutorials on how to use advanced specifications. What we're going to do here is we're going to demonstrate how we can make a slip and drive connection complementary with the drive and slip connection and make sure that we always get the drive of a specific fitting to be on the depth of that fitting. Currently on the left, we've selected the slip and drive connector, and we're now going to go over the parameters we've chosen for it. First, we have the parameter for appearance. You'll notice that we've chosen the appearance slip and drive. And whenever we're actually representing an appearance, we're always reading the width first by the depth. So if it says appearance slip and drive, it means on the width of the fitting is the slip and on the depth of the fitting is the drive. And you can see that here that on the width of this fitting, we're moving over it with our cursor at the moment, you can see a preview of a slip. And on the depth of the fitting, you could see a preview of the drive. So it's width by depth, slip, and drive. The reverse of that, of course, would be a drive and slip. If you had chosen that appearance, on the width would be the drive, and on the depth would be the slip, as you can see here. This is the width, you can see a drive now, and on the depth, you can see a slip. So we're going to move it back to the slip and drive appearance for slip and drive. You can see that we've got compatible selected as itself, which is always natural for all connections. However, we want to point out something in this particular case. When we say compatible with slip and drive, we're talking about if we attach the width of one fitting to the width of another fitting, then we should use the default compatible connector. In this particular case, it means slip and drive should be slip and drive on both sides of the connector. However, if we were to take the second fitting we place in a drawing and rotate it at 90 degrees, now we'd actually be attaching the depth of that fitting to the width of the first fitting. In that particular case, we need the connectors on the second fitting to change. And that change is defined by whatever connector you've chosen in your complementary selection set. So what we're going to do here is say for slip and drive, we would like to make a complementary connector of drive and slip. Now currently in this tutorial, it's already set to do so, but to show you how you would get it set to what you'd like, you'd come over here to the dialog box, you'd click on it, and then you'd answer the two questions in the complementary field. The first one is, what connector should be complementary with slip and drive? In this particular case, we've said drive and slip. That means that if we were to take two pieces of duct and we were to rotate the second piece of duct at 90 degrees, that instead of using the compatible connector, it should switch and use the complementary connector. And this is going to be much more clear when we demonstrate this on the drawing shortly. So what we're going to do here is we're going to say that for slip and drive, the complementary connector will be drive and slip. Now one thing I want to point out, each connector can only be complementary with one other connector. You cannot have slip and drive complementary with two different connector types, only one. Therefore, if you switch and set a complementary connection for one connector, in this particular case, slip and drive is complementary with drive and slip, PractiCAD would automatically change and update the complementary connector for drive and slip to slip and drive. It just does the reverse. You don't have to change them both. You'll notice if we press OK, since we've set slip and drive to be complementary with drive and slip, once we press the OK button, if you click on drive and slip, you'll see complementary is now slip and drive. It does it automatic. You only have to change it once. So we're going to go back into slip and drive. We're going to go to complementary, go to our dialog box, and we're going to look at the next choice. The next choice is about orientation. Two choices here, width and depth. Essentially what we're doing is we're stating that for a particular connection, we want the drive on a specific side. For example, we say that if the connector is slip and drive, the orientation of the drive should be on the depth. If we had changed it to width, it would put the drive on the width. But for those that want to make it so that the depth of the fitting, which is usually the parameter we're looking at in front view, the depth of the fitting, is always going to carry the drive. We set it here, and now we press OK. You can see if we come over to drive and slip, and we go into complementary, drive and slip's complementary with slip and drive. But for the drive and slip connection, we're stating that the orientation of the drive should always be on the width of the fitting. And we're going to show you what classifies as width and depth of the fittings very shortly. But these parameters happen to be the most commonly used as well. So if you're trying to set your PractiCAD for slips and drives and slips, standing S's and standing drives, these are the most common choices here. Generally, the philosophy is always put the drive on the depth or always put the drive on the short side. And there's a separate tutorial on that under the advanced specification section. We're going to press OK. We're going to hit the save key. We're going to exit out of my library to put these two connectors in action. We're going to go into the fitting bin and we're going to grab a rectangular piece of duct. And you can see here that we've got it set for slip and drive and slip and drive. Now what we're going to do is place this fitting on the drawing. And we're going to double click on it and open up the AutoCAD property box. You can see the connectors here. Now what we're going to do is let go of this fitting. We're going to grab a rectangular elbow. Now we're going to hit C spacebar for continue. And let's go into the item box. Now take a look here. Currently, I haven't placed the rectangular elbow on the drawing yet. It's still waiting for me to attach it. But in order to attach the rectangular elbow to the rectangular duct on your drawing, it currently has the connector in slip and drive. That is slip and drive's compatible connector. Slip and drive was set to be compatible with itself. That will always be the choice when we're taking the width of one fitting and attaching it to the width of another fitting. And we always read in PractiCAD the width of elbows as the cheek parameter. So this parameter here is the width of the elbow. The throat parameter is the depth. So since we're attaching the width of the elbow to the width of the rectangular duct, and they're attached right here, we're using the compatible parameters. However, if we switch this elbow and rotate it at 90 degrees, we're now taking the throat or the depth of the elbow and we're attaching it to the width of the rectangular duct. In this particular case, PractiCAD does not use the compatible connector for the elbow. It uses the complementary connector for the elbow. And you can see here that it says drive and slip. Once again, it's always width by depth. So the drive is on the width of the elbow. And if you take a look, this is the cheek. The cheek is the width for elbows in PractiCAD. So the cheek is carrying, or the width is carrying, the drive. And it needs to, because the drive would be right here. We always want the drive on the depth in this particular tutorial. So what we've got is the ability to just rotate our fittings using complementary connectors. And if we're going width to width, it uses compatible. If we're going width of one fitting to the depth of another fitting, it uses complementary. So here you can see we're going to attach an elbow. Then we're going to take this elbow, we're going to rotate it, and then we're going to add one more piece of duct. And we're going to hit escape, and we're just going to look at the parameters of all these different fittings. Here we've got an elbow. You can see that PractiCAD, based on the parameters we've chosen, is choosing drive and slip. The drive is on the width, the slip is on the depth. The cheek is the width of this fitting because it's a rectangular elbow. And the cheek is carrying the drive. You can see right here, the drive's on the width of this fitting. It's right here where it should be because we said orientation, depth. And if you go to click on the rectangular duct, you can see that it's slip and drive. It's got the drive on the depth of the fitting. And that makes sense because we're attaching the width on one, where the drive is always carried on the width of the drive and slip. But for the slip and drive, we stated that the drive is always carried on the depth. So this way they make perfect complementary connectors. Setting these correctly will make it easy to just rotate your duct and attach it in PractiCAD, and make sure when you download the PractiCam, you get the drives and slips on the proper side.